Okay. 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 So, welcome to everybody for the seminar. So today we have Professor Youngmin Park. Professor Park is studied for his bachelor and his master at Case Western University, not that far from here, so a few hours of car. He studied applied mathematics there. He then moved to Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, for a PhD, where he studied with Bard and Ruth. And he's been postdoctoral fellow at University of Pennsylvania at Brandeis, and then also at University of Manitoba. And is interested in many different aspects of applied mathematics, in particular cell physiology, electrophysiology, immunology, and he uses combinations of methods for ODEs and PDEs, like oscillation theory, perturbation theory, seeing the algorithm, and many other techniques, including neural networks, to study this topic. And it's a great pleasure for us to have him here. So I'm gonna stop with the introduction, let him talk about his research. So thanks a lot for being here.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation and for your attention, everyone. So I understand that the I guess the theme of the seminar is supposed to be data science. So this will be a little bit different, and I'll give you a reference if you want to see data science applications of what I'll talk about. But at least I hope it's interesting. Okay. And I've decided to kind of scale back a little bit from the abstract and title that I submitted, and I'll just go back to something a bit more bare bones from which more things follow. Okay. And before we talk about that, let me just share a bit about why I get so excited about oscillators and where these things show up. So on the top left, this is a pair of videos from the Freyden lab at Brandeis University, and these are Belousov-Zhabotinsky reactions. And they have these experimental preparations where they've etched small wells into some kind of material. It transmits light, but I don't quite know the material. But nevertheless, they're very small wells, and you can see by the scale bars just how small they are. And between these wells, there's a small channel between them, and the spatial scale is so small that they can really treat these wells as ODEs, as ordinary differential equations, and they're able to generate experimental preparations where they can test theories about the existence and stability of what I call various phase-locked states. So on the left, this is called antiphase, where the period is staggered by a half, or rather the spiking, this white color is staggered by a half a period between them. There's a half period time difference between them. So it's settled to a constant phase difference of a half period. And on the right, there's something maybe more interesting going on. Based on the topology, you can get these different behaviors. But there's a central node that's kind of oscillating at a particular period, and then the outer nodes are synchronized, but they're also there's some constant phase difference between the outer nodes and the inner nodes. And they have questions about, how does the network topology affect these different phase locked states? Is it always just antiphase? Is it possible to get synchrony? But yeah, they eventually want to connect these things to neuroscience because network topology has a big effect on how oscillators synchronize or don't synchronize. On the top right, this is an example where oscillator synchrony is actually a bad thing. This is a small window into the cortex of a rat, and we're talking about, I don't know, about a few millimeters across, and they've induced, using a chemical called carbachol, they've induced a spiral wave in a rat to just try to understand how epileptic seizures form and how they can be dissipated. So that's what we're seeing is a spiral wave happening in a region of the brain where spiral waves really shouldn't happen. This is where virtually all of the neurons are synchronized, or there's a very small phase difference between them, and you get this pattern. And it's known that epileptic seizures exhibit this kind of wave-like behavior. So if we can understand the existence of stability and the biological conditions where those things happen, we have some hope of maybe breaking patterns like this from forming in the outer layer of the brain, the cortex, when they shouldn't happen. In the bottom left, this is just a schematic. It's a static image. It's a schematic of on the left is of this particular figure is the stomatic gastric. It's just the nervous system of a particular crab species called Cancer borealis. And this figure was created by the Martyr Lab at Brandeis University. And there are all kinds of things known about this what's called the stomatic gastric ganglion in particular, and that's where the schematic electrodes are pointing at. And we can record from them. So these are just example traces of recordings from the stomatic gastric ganglion. It exhibits something called a triphasic rhythm, which I won't go into. But the point is that it generates this very robust rhythm that's responsible for the digestive rhythm in the crab. And there's enough known that we can create these diagrams that and we kind of know the various types of synapses that exist between the different groups of neurons within the stomatic gastric ganglion. And at this point, I think we do know enough that we could create a model that mimics the stomatic gastric ganglion to incredible detail. But then, like, the issue is that we then create something that's just as complicated as the original biological system, and then what do we really gain, right? So my goal is to be able to reduce any of these systems to something much more tractable that still maintains the most important features of the original system, but still somehow is just much easier to understand. And I'll show you a simple example of how that can be done. And on the bottom right, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is an example of fireflies that synchronize. I don't know if they exist in North America. I think this particular species is somewhere in Southeast Asia. And I know that in South America, there are similar species. This one actually, you can kind of see almost a traveling wave from right to left in that scene. But anyway, that's another example of coupled oscillators. Each firefly they each have their own intrinsic frequency, and when they're introduced to another collection of fireflies, they all see each other, the flight flashes, and then eventually they start synchronizing. And that really is it's a question of coupled oscillators, but there the coupling is done through vision. So with oscillators, there are various disorders, and this is just a small subset. Central pattern generators can end up going. They can end up with some problems, and one example is with neonatal babies. Sometimes they have breathing troubles, and it's possible. I don't quite know where the state of the research is now, but when I started math bio research, there was a neuroscientist that suspected that the pre-Betzinger complex, which is a small cluster of neurons, just 200 neurons in your brainstem, that's responsible for generating your breathing rhythm. And it's a cluster of neurons that exists in all mammals. So, if we understand synchrony, how synchrony is maintained in regions like that, maybe we can treat these breathing disorders in neonatal babies. Cardiac issues, alternans, arrhythmias, those are just not good rhythms that might exist in cardiac rhythms. And the question is, can we design a protocol or something that uses the minimum amount of energy to push the heart rhythm back into its normal original state? And that's something that's similar to what pacemakers do. And in the brain, as mentioned here, you could have epileptic seizures, which is the result of neurons synchronizing too much. And then there's all kinds of evidence and things about how Parkinsonian tremors might be due to an oscillator-related issue somewhere in the brain. And then sleep disorders, that's related to an oscillator, but this time it's maybe more more related to the circadian rhythm. But nevertheless, there are these things, and so I'm not trying to cure all of humanity's disorders, but there's a set of interesting things that are linked by oscillators that has some interesting math and some great potential applications, and that's really what excites me. So, in terms of the math, there are a few things that are limited in the current state of coupled oscillator theory. So, in all of these examples, from the disorders to all these videos that I'm showing you, they all are heterogeneous. You know, mathematically speaking, a lot of people like to idealize things and make everything homogeneous, which is still good. I'm not knocking it. It's actually very important. We've come a long way thanks to simplifying assumptions. But the fact is that biological systems have a lot of heterogeneity. And in fact, in some cases, it might even be necessary to have heterogeneity. And then another potential issue is that the coupling is often very strong. In the classic coupled oscillator theory that I was trained in, we had to assume that coupling was weak. And even in the cases where there are other methods where you can take coupling to be stronger, but then you have to get rid of the heterogeneity assumption. You have to assume that everything is symmetric so that you can apply group theory. So that's called HK theory, which I won't talk about. But yeah, there are all these different methods that don't quite have all of the features that I need, which is heterogeneity, strong coupling, and then another thing is bursting. In a lot of a lot of neurons that are responsible for maintaining regular rhythms, like in central pattern generators, you see a lot of bursting. And coupled oscillator methods right now are really weak when it comes to bursting at really almost any level. So this is my goal. My long-term goal is to figure out how to combine a method that at least somehow, even if it's limited, somehow combines all of these three features that exist so often in biological systems. Okay, and in particular today, I'll be focusing on the strong coupling case, which I really mean non-weak coupling. So I'll try to maybe stick to non-weak, but if I say strong coupling, I really just mean non-weak, and I'll try to explain what non-weak means in a moment. Okay, so I want to emphasize that my approach is one of many. Like I said, a lot of people have tried different things, and it's important whether they assume symmetry or homogeneity, whatever the case may be. All of it's really important. And I'm not saying my method is better than any of it. It's just my approach is one of many, and it is a starting point. Okay, and it does come with flaws, and I welcome questions about it. I think it's very important for people to be aware of the limitations of the things that I'm working on, because there's no theory that comes without limitations. That if you have a theory that explains literally everything, I'm not sure I'd be very skeptical. So everything I talk about, I'll surely play up my results and make it sound pretty cool, but it's going to have limitations. So yeah, I welcome questions about it. It's just important to just even ask about the limitations. But the approach that I'll show you, I'm really excited about it because there's so much potential for generalization in a way that captures all of these common features in biological systems. Okay, so I won't harp on that too much more. Let's just focus on the strong coupling part. And to explain the method that I'm using, we're going to look at a few concrete examples, and I'll just try to explain what's going on in these videos. And a part of why I'm taking the time to explain this is that it's really hard to know what the audience needs for me to make sense to them. And I feel like these videos will help. And even if the particular method or the questions are kind of constrained, at least we can get on the same page and you can kind of see what I'm trying to get at. So in that spirit, what I'm showing here is on the top left, this is a plot of two oscillators. It's the state variable of two oscillators. So the first one oscillator satisfies these four equations, and the other oscillator is a direct copy. So instead of x1, y1, z1, w1, we have x2, y2, z2, w2, and they're coupled through this term. Okay, and there's an epsilon term here, which we will throughout this talk we will always scale the coupling term by some constant that we can scale to make it to make it not too weak, but something that we can alter, something that we can use to alter the coupling strength. Okay, so by that I just mean if epsilon is like 0.01, then it's a couple orders of magnitude smaller than the amplitude of these oscillations. So that would be that's an intuitively weak coupling case. If epsilon is 0.1, now we're on the same order of magnitude as these amplitudes. And so now we're talking about non-weak coupling. Okay. But we'll change the coupling strength. So when epsilon is small, that makes coupling weak. When epsilon is a bit, we move away from that small value, then coupling becomes stronger. And here I've just chosen an epsilon value that's kind of, it's a bit bigger, almost certainly where weak coupling theory would fail. But anyway, I just chose this value of epsilon, and I'm simulating this coupled system in this panel here. Okay, so in this plot, it's the two X concentration values of the two oscillators. One oscillator is in the solid red, the other is in the dashed red. And I started with a phase difference of pi over 2. And I'm assuming a period of 2 pi without loss of generality. So we're talking about a quarter phase difference at the start of the simulation. And we can see, just looking at the time difference from the one peak to the other, yeah, we start with about a quarter phase difference, a quarter period phase difference. And the system is such that the phase differences, as we continue simulating over time, they happen to converge to 0 phase difference. And we can see the peaks start to converge together. The phase difference, the estimated phase difference, is shown down here. So we start with about a quarter phase difference apart at the beginning, and then as time goes on, the phase differences converge to 0. Okay, and the model itself, this is a model of it's like of protein or genetic products for a circadian rhythm type of model. So the X, Y, Z, Ws, these all correspond to changing concentration levels. Okay. Okay, so with a quarter period phase difference, we end up after enough time at 0 phase difference. And if we initialize the same model at about a half period phase difference, we can see that the peak to peak time difference it started with about a half period apart. It seems to still converge with a little more time. Yeah, it still converges. It ends up converging to 0 phase difference. And here it's converging towards 2 pi, but these things, it's mod 2 pi, so it really, 2 pi is basically 0. So we're really converging to synchrony again. So based on the initial condition of the phase difference, we can plot how the phase difference will change over time as time goes to infinity. And here we're starting with 3/4 of phase difference apart, it's very similar to the quarter period phase difference. And here again, we still see the phase differences converge towards synchrony. Okay. And then one more here, this is with a 0 phase difference initial condition. The two initial conditions start right on top of each other, and we can see that phase difference, it just stays synchronous here, and it'll stay synchronous forever. Okay. So this plot, so the takeaways of phase differences is that it's very simple. This plot down here it fully describes everything that's going on above, but in a much simpler plot. It captures all of the relevant phase dynamics, because personally, I only care about phase difference dynamics. I want to see where they converge to over long times, or reasons, just over some time. And you can also see that this really looks like, it looks like you can see the fixed points and stability. Like it looks like antiphase here is unstable. So there's some kind of unstable fixed point, and then it looks like synchrony is a stable fixed point. And we can see that the time traces bear that out in this plot down here. So the question is, the question that people asked in the 70s and 80s is, can we write down an equation for this plot, for the phase difference dynamics? Okay, and we will use this plot very often. So I'll take a moment to pause here. If there are any questions, this is the time to ask, because I will lead on this plot quite a bit.
I actually have a question. So
okay,
exactly in the red plot, okay, the plot like squared with the red line. So there's going to be an unstable fixed point somewhere. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Because here there is some sort of angle which increases on one side and decreases on the other side. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Good. Good. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So yeah, so it seems like in this picture, we could even ignore all the simulation stuff. In this picture, yeah, it looks like there's an unstable fixed point and there's like a stable fixed point, and it looks like all the dynamics. We don't even need to. It seems like there's a hope that we don't need to simulate all of the state variables. It seems like there's a chance of writing down a much simpler set of equations, or maybe even one equation that just captures this bottom plot. So that was the goal behind weak coupling theory. This is going to be a very heuristic, just a very non-rigorous, non-careful summary of the derivation. But at the end of this slide, this particular slide, I'll show you what the punchline is. But starting with, just for simplicity, we'll just assume two oscillators for this talk. Here are the equations, the coupled version of the equations, and the generalized set of equations from what I showed you before. For this, the generalization of these equations. Okay, here we are. And we just assume that the vector fields F are smooth. We'll assume that they're the same vector fields for, again, just for simplicity. And then we'll also assume the same coupling functions here, again, for simplicity. And each system we assume that they admit a t-periodic stable limit cycle. And so that's an isolated periodic orbit that's attracting when epsilon is equal to 0. We assume that the limit cycles persist for some epsilon that's non-zero but still small. The coupling function G, we assume that I intentionally write it down in a very general form, but this function G is, again, a generalization of this coupling term here. And then to write down the phase difference dynamics, okay, we apply the chain rule directly. And I know I am skipping some details, and so I will unfortunately have to ask the audience to just take it for granted that we can write down a phase variable for each oscillator as just using the chain rule as 1 plus epsilon times this term. So imagine if epsilon is 0, if you have no coupling, then the phase of each oscillator will advance at a constant rate. And when epsilon is non-zero, the phase will still advance at a constant rate, but it'll get altered by, based on what's coming in from the coupling term. And I'm waving my hands a bit, but we can apply first order averaging and define this phase difference variable. And this, oops. Am I still sharing? Yeah, okay. You can still see it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So so we can apply first order averaging to obtain actually a scalar differential equation for the phase difference dynamics. So it really is very straightforward in the case when epsilon is small to write down an equation that describes that plot that I was alluding to earlier. So this integral just comes from first order averaging, and this term, this grad theta 1, it's known how to compute this in the neighborhood of the limit cycle, and that's often written as z. So that's where that z comes from here. Okay. So what we've done is we've taken two n-dimensional systems and then transformed it into one scalar autonomous ordinary differential equation. And the reason why we apply first order averaging, well, one of the reasons is that we had to transform a non-autonomous system into an autonomous system, and under certain conditions, that this is actually a very useful tool to transform a non-autonomous system into an autonomous system. So something nice to have in your tool belt if you happen to work with right-hand sides that have an order epsilon term in them, and with periodic behavior going on under the hood. Okay, so that's the summary of weak coupling theory, that we can take these two n-dimensional systems and then just reduce everything to a scalar autonomous ordinary differential equation. And the nice thing is that it actually works really well when epsilon's weak. So here's another example using, so this is, I'm not writing down all the equations for this model, but this is an example of a conductance-based neural model, very similar to Hodgkin and Huxley. There's a synaptic coupling term that's coupled to the other oscillator. And there's some other variables for ionic and gating and synaptic variables and such that I won't write down for now. But here's the coupling term. And Gsyn, the synaptic conductance, is, you can just think of that as epsilon. Okay. So the nice thing about weakly coupled oscillator theory, or just the scalar autonomous ODE, is that we can just plot the right-hand side. And that's what's shown here. And this is, I'm saying order 1 because it's order epsilon. And Gsyn, or epsilon, we're taking it to be 0.02. So this is actually quite small. The amplitude of oscillations are in the order of like, they're like 3 orders of magnitude greater than this number. So it's quite weak coupling, which is good. And so the right-hand side of the reduced equations look like this. So this is saying there's a stable fixed point at half period and then an unstable fixed point at synchrony. And on the bottom, here's the full model, the phase differences in the full model, but with a bunch of initial conditions taken across from 0 to phase differences from 0 to t. And we can see that the full coupled models, no matter where I start with the phase differences, they always converge to t/2, just as predicted by weak coupling theory. So that's very good. But if we increase Gsyn to something more reasonable and more biologically realistic, like 0.25, the coupling theory doesn't change, right? It just, all it is it just gets scaled on the right-hand side by epsilon. So if epsilon's bigger, we just change the amplitude of the right-hand side. And but in the full model at the bottom, we find that the phase differences not only converge to t/2, and this, I know this looks like it's not going to t/2, but it's an artifact of the way that we chose how to show this plot. So not only do the phase differences go to half a period, but they also go to different phase differences that are not quite synchronous. Okay, and we can go in and actually look at the solutions and see that these things are not spurious. They're actually phase differences that are not synchrony. Okay. So I want to pause here a little bit because I often get questions about, this no longer looks like it's described by a scalar ODE, right? Because some of the solutions like start to overlap and they it seems like you don't have that smooth dependence on initial conditions. And I will say that, so I can explain it in more detail offline if you like. Let's take it for granted that there's actually nothing wrong going on here. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but I promise it's not. If for anyone that can make sense of what I'm about to say, it's just that I'm using initial conditions in the full model that are very far away from what the underlying attractor has become. Okay, this non-weak coupling warps the original Libet cycle attractor to be something so different that that you end up getting weird things like this. It's just, you need some transients for things to converge. So yeah, believe it or not, things are not going wrong here. It just looks really messy for reasons that we can account for.
Okay. So just for a little bit of understanding for me of what's happening here. So first of all, are you considering only quadratic interactions?
Let's see. Not
like
in general, no. In this
general,
case,
no.
yeah, in general, no.
Okay. The other question is, so when you go from a very small epsilon to a very large epsilon, in practice you are a little bit manipulating the time scales, correct?
Yes.
You're right. So in this time scale, in practice, there is a natural, so in the new time scale, the one with Gsyn equal to 0.25, there are a natural two different systems in practice. One, when for long time, when phi dot is basically 0. And then there is the original time scale to reach to the time scale in which phi dot is equal to 0. Am I correct?
I'm not sure I'm understanding that distinction.
Maybe let's go back to the previous slide. Wait, yes, this one with the averaging equation. Okay, yeah. So when your epsilon becomes very large, in practice, you're considering the points in which you're considering some stationary solutions when h of minus phi is equal to h of phi, right? But that happens at the second time scale. There is some sort of original time scale in which you rapidly go towards that. Am I correct?
In terms of, so the interesting thing is, so I think I understand, and the phase, so I think in the phase differences, oh yeah, right. So I think, right. So I think I understand, right. So yeah, that's what we're seeing with these weird movements. Yeah, there is a faster effect under the hood, which shows up because I didn't choose these initial conditions carefully.
Right.
Yeah.
So from the initial conditions for initial time scale, you go very rapidly, and then you kind of stabilize towards the phi's for which h of minus phi is equal to h of phi.
Yes.
Right. And I think that what is seen here is a little bit of the original, the first time scales in practice. The behavior.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm very impressed. Yeah. You might be the only one person that didn't. Yeah. You didn't ask about this. You understood it. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Exactly. So I didn't account for what could go wrong with the this faster timescale, which is what's leading to these weird behaviors. And then right after a short time, then we start. Now that we've gotten rid of those faster transients, then things start to move much more slowly. Yes, exactly. Okay, nice. All right, so yeah, so the faster stuff, I'm not going to worry about it, just because by and large, I'm really looking at the question where I'm sufficiently close to that underlying attractor, and we'll just take it for granted that at least for the systems I'll look at, these faster timescale transients, they don't necessarily have a big effect. I'm sure there are systems out there that mess everything up, but once we get rid of these, once we move past these faster transients, the method that I propose actually works really well down here. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so what I'm also showing here is that with the weak coupling theory, this only captures one fixed point, which is here, and it doesn't capture these not quite synchronous phase-locked phase differences. You know, they're not showing up at all. So what I've proposed with my colleague Dan Wilson is that, well, this small epsilon is just, it's a major limitation because biological oscillators they tend to be strongly coupled. So let's try to move past that. Let's try to add correction terms, derived correction terms to the phase difference dynamics so that we have some hope of increasing epsilon beyond that weak limit. Okay, so here's the proposed method that, and I'll go through it again, this very high level kind of summary of all of it, but the assumptions are exactly the same as before. The system will just take it to be exactly the same as before, but now epsilon is not necessarily small. So we do have to derive not only a phase equation, but something called an isostable equation. Intuitively, this describes the amplitude off of the limit cycle. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So this is a particular choice of an amplitude equation. And not only that, but there are terms that have to be computed for which methods just didn't exist before 2020. And so now they exist, and which enabled me to take this and then apply it to the coupling case. We can apply first order averaging, which, yes, that's absolutely a limitation. But we're looking at the case where these phase differences, are past that initial transient point. So we've decayed away from, moved away from the fast dynamics. So it is a major caveat that I'm very clear about pointing out in all of my work. At the same time, there are higher order averaging methods we can incorporate if needed. And some colleagues of mine in this field, Rachel Nix and Steve Coombs at University of Nottingham, they are looking at applying higher order averaging methods to address cases that you mentioned. So I'm I'm hand waving a lot of details, which frankly are very tedious, and I'm not trying to hide anything. You can look up the papers here for the details, but we did have to use a symbolic solver to get to this point. But nevertheless, we obtained these higher order correction terms to the original phase difference dynamics. Okay, and once again, we've gone from two n-dimensional systems to a single scalar autonomous ODE, but this time epsilon is not necessarily small. And you'll notice too that it really is just a Taylor expansion. There's no secret to anything I'm doing. And so all of the limitations that come with Taylor expansions with like the radius of convergence, they all apply here. I haven't explicitly calculated what the radius of convergence should be for various systems, but whatever those limitations are, they will show up here. So yeah, it's not a it's not a cure-all. I'm not seeking to solve everything with coupled oscillators, but it's a start. And again, there's a lot of potential for generalizations here. But let me show you how this method performs. So in the weak coupling theory case, or the weak coupling case, both the classic theory, which is order 1, and my proposed method, which I'm showing to order 4, they coincide. They show the same stable fixed point at t/2. And if we increase G-sin to 0.25, now we see these new stable phase lock states in the coupling theory, which don't show up in the classic theory, the classic weak coupling theory, and they do in fact correspond directly to these new phase lock states in the full phase difference dynamics. Okay, so yeah, we were pretty excited about this. I understand it can seem like such a narrow thing, but it's a step that wasn't taken on the order of 50 years. A lot of people they stuck to weak coupling theory for 50 years to try to understand neurons. And so this was our contribution to show that we can finally go beyond that. Okay, so personally, a very exciting thing. And then as for generalizations, I'll just mention briefly that we were able to talk about n-body interactions, which seems like a very hot field right now, or a hot topic. So in all the examples I showed you above, those are for two oscillators, but you get additional interactions on simplicial complexes for n equals 3 oscillators and n equals 4 oscillators. And we were able to say something concrete about the phase difference dynamics for, in this case, 3 oscillators. And I'll skip the details just because I don't want to get too lost in the details. And then this work is we can extend the method to n-to-m phase locking, where one oscillator traverses n times for where the other oscillator traverses m times. And these are just predictions and kind of confirmations of the proposed method that things work out. And not only that, but I've also added, these are also showing heterogeneity. And I understand I'm not explaining these figures very well, but I just want to move forward. But yeah, I'm just remarking also that I did look at heterogeneity in this case. So not only do we have non-weak coupling, but now we have n-to-m coupling with heterogeneity. So now we can really start to understand heterogeneous coupled oscillators that show up in nature. Okay, just to summarize, we've extended the classic weak coupling theory with the same benefits of analyzing a single scalar equation for non-weak coupling, for n-body interactions, for n-to-m phase locking, with heterogeneity, for forcing. We are working on forcing plus delay, bursting, and applying higher order averaging, and as well as obtaining more concrete bounds and accuracy. And as far as the data science part goes, there are significant benefits to the approach that I'm showing you. Again, this is all very restricted, but I want to start branching out and showing you some more, showing the field at large some more useful properties of what I'm doing. So, for example, control. The questions of control is just much easier with a reduced system. System identification is also much easier with a reduced system, and parameter estimation is also much easier with a reduced system. So everything I'm doing is for the benefit of data scientists and biologists, hopefully in the near future. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you want to look at the data science applications of what I've just shown you, look at Dan Wilson at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He's I am struggling to catch up with the immense amount of ideas and the he's amazing. So if you're interested in oscillators, if you have a question with oscillators and want to understand how you can apply them to questions related to data science, look at Dan Wilson's work. He's fantastic, and he's also very friendly. So yeah, I strongly endorse all of his work. Okay, so thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much, and I'll take some questions now.
Okay, so let's thank Professor Park for the great presentation. Questions? Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
I think one of the things I'm really curious about is how you get into such fields as this. How do you start getting into this kind of research?
Can I ask what level you're at? Like,
Yeah, so yeah, there are several students of mine which have taken mostly statistics course, but who have worked on problems in continuous time. And some of the students here have looked into some problems like Kuramoto model. And so the interest is maybe I'm interested in pursuing further studies in that directions. So what's the path?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the weak coupling theory stuff, I learned that during grad school because of my advisor. He was really big into weak coupling theory stuff and made a ton of contributions in that field. And then I met one of his former postdocs who worked on the amplitude equations, the isostables. And then yeah, him and I just started chatting and then realized we have something in common. So a lot of the training came from my PhD. And then, yeah, I mean, if I can just take a brief detour, another thing that's a big benefit of doing this is that this is really, if you look at the Fourier modes of these terms, that's the same as adding additional sinusoidal terms to the Kuramoto coupling term. So instead of just having a sine function, my work is meant to let people figure out what biologically realistic sinusoid terms they can add to move further away from that. I think a fundamental assumption for the Kuramoto model is that you're close to a Hopf bifurcation. But if you want to move away from that, you got to add some additional terms. But so anyway, this is coming back from the detour. Yeah, it's just the part of it was the training and the advisor that I found. So you know, there's a lot of people out there, including myself. I'm looking for grad students and maybe even postdocs to work with me on stuff like this. So yeah, I feel like I gave a bit of a scattered answer, but I hope I answered your question. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions too.
Good, yes, good. So other questions? Actually, the question is on this slide, right? So here epsilon is large, okay, so it's not small. Still, you expand in epsilon, right? So there is some underlying assumptions there that you're making.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So and I mean, I guess it works, but still, you need something like some regularity assumption, some sort of right.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have too much to say about that, just because I've been focused so much on the computational parts and trying to just figure out algorithms to even compute these things efficiently. But you're right. Yeah, I actually haven't looked as carefully maybe as I should at the more of the mathematical questions. So yeah, if anyone's interested in looking at that carefully, I'd be very happy to chat with you.
The other thing is in this equation is that you sometimes might decide to make some symmetry assumptions. Now, once you make the symmetry assumptions, then other than the fact that you kill some of the terms, even terms or something like that, right? But in practice, you have you kind of simplified the phase plane because you have many more ways to show that there are some recurrent motion. Because sometimes you don't need things like having conservative. If you have some symmetries, then you might not need to have conservations. You don't need conservation sometimes,
Sure.
right? So I'm guessing that, and there are situations I believe that neurons are not, you can assume, for example, that the H2Ks are even.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. So I mean, if you assume, so you can actually go very, very far with if you're correct, if you're clever with how you assume different types of symmetry, and not even necessarily symmetry, but if you have a situation like this shown here where the vector fields and the coupling functions are the same, you can actually take epsilon to be surprisingly large. You can use group theory to go very far. So yeah, I mean, you can, and then with particular symmetry assumptions, some of these terms will certainly simplify and even get deleted entirely. So you can go very far. Yeah, so I'm going in the opposite direction, where I did show you the case of F and G being the same between the oscillators, but all of this work actually allows you to have completely different vector fields and completely different coupling functions, so long as the periods are, so I'll phrase it like it's restrictive, but it's really not as restrictive as it sounds. So long as the periods are sufficiently similar, we can have completely different vector fields and coupling functions. The question of how similar the periods have to be, that's what I'm working on. But yeah, and it also depends on there's a lot that I still don't know yet. But yeah, I'm unfortunately moving away from symmetry and don't quite I don't have the best intuition to be able to answer questions.
Yeah, and I guess that when you do that, you have to change the H, because the H is going to be some sort of average between the G's and something like that, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Good. Okay, good. So maybe one last question is, most of the people here have worked on discrete matters. Even some people have worked on continuous matters, right? So I'm asking the question myself, right? But when you go to try to simulate these models, right? So do you often run into non-physical solutions? What I'm saying is, let's say in logistic equation. Now, when you go from the continuous discrete case, then you get all this chaotic behavior that is non-physical. And so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please. Well, I mean, you please continue if you had more.
No, it's basically it's just this is a question in practice, right? So does that happen to you, or what are the countermeasures that you use?
So okay, yeah, that is oh my goodness, these are fantastic questions. I'm thank you. Like, I never get questions like this. So yeah, so one thing that people have done with coupled oscillator theory, it's instead of continuous time, people will look at what are called firing time maps. So when there is a neuron that sends a signal, they treat it like a delta pulse, and then that's going to send a signal to the next neuron, and then you can calculate the time to the next spike for either neuron, and then you can construct a discrete map based on that. And a very interesting thing is that people have used this type of construction for understanding bursting neurons. And there you can find chaos, but it actually turns out that the chaos is actually a feature of bursting neurons. There are actually a lot of bursting neurons in biological systems that actually exhibit chaos. And so in that sense, even though we get chaos, you can still use it as a mechanism that describes what's actually happening biologically. And then in this case, with the continuous time stuff, I typically don't go far enough. There's clear like limitations when I actually simulate these things, this higher order expansion, where it just stops being accurate for large enough epsilon. It doesn't even have to be a large epsilon. It could be even quite small, but things stop reproducing what they should. And as that's the closest I've gotten so far to having non-realistic or non-biological solutions. Yeah, it's, I mean, in that case, it's basically like the Taylor expansion just kind of failing, probably because I've gone beyond the radius of convergence, you know. So that's a fantastic question, and I wish I had a more interesting answer, but that's the best I can give you now.
Yeah, awesome. So what I was thinking there is that in situations in which that happens, if there is data available, that might drive the intuition. Because it might tell you, you know, I have this phenomenon tells me that, my model tells me something else. Well, the model to be, maybe I have to modify the model in this direction because the data set tells me that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and so that might help. That might help somehow adjusting in such a way that the model doesn't end up giving something which is unreasonable, non-biological solution. Or yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Other questions? No? Well, if not, let's thank Professor Park again for a great presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna stop the recording.